Welcome to the Galloway Show, coming live from my living room with only me, my good wife, and my pal in Manchester involved. This is no budget television, never mind low budget. Absolutely no budget television. And therefore, of course, it's free to air. And thanks to YouTube for hosting it. But you'll recall that this Galloway Show midweek takes the place of the mother of all talk shows, Extra, which we had to abandon for financial reasons 3 weeks back. We definitely need to defend the existence of the mothership, the mother of all talk shows, which goes out on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. London time. Now, you can contribute to that. The details will be coming across the screen throughout this 1 hour show. But you can also do it, I think, by making special prioritized comments on this broadcast, and it will all go to keep the mother of all talk shows alive. Moats now has a regular weekly audience of more than 1.2 million people, making it truly a global open university of the airwaves. Now, of course, many of you have already given more than generously, and I'm not asking you to give again at this stage. But many of you, most of you, haven't given at all. So I'm asking you, please give to the Moats £1, $1 or £1 or €1. It's not asking for much to keep a global university alive. Never mind tuition fees. It's not even the price of a cup of tea in a motorway services cafe. So don't make me ask again. Please do what you can. Keep the Moats going with your donations. Now, tonight we have some very serious and somber things to discuss, so let me press on. Julian Assange, predictably, was issued this morning with the declaration from the Westminster Magistrates Court that he is to be deported to the United States, extradited there to face trumped-up charges under the Espionage Act, though, of course, the charges don't even begin to suggest that he did any spying. He wanted for trial for one reason only. He told the truth. As a world historic journalist and publisher, he told us what our governments did not want us to know about what they were doing on our tax dollar, on our tax pound, and in our name. His war logs will go down in history. 500 years from now, people will still be studying them when they look back at the history, the bloodthirsty, heinous history of the empire at this point in its decline. So Julian Assange may well very soon be on an airplane to the US injustice system to be tried before a kangaroo court in Virginia, where most of the jurors will be beholden in one way or another to the company being the Central Intelligence Agency, one of the central disaster actors of our time, of the entire post-Second World War era. No time exists for me to adumbrate the crimes for which they are responsible, but they wanted to assassinate Julian Assange in London. They were prepared to do it. They spied on him throughout his incarceration in the embassy of Ecuador, filming even his meetings with his lawyers, his legal team. In any other jurisdiction, in any democratic country, the case of the United States would have fallen at that first hurdle when the prosecutor is spying on the lawyers and the client that they represent and knows every single piece of their defense because they have illegally bugged a sovereign embassy. Then no case would survive that. It would be thrown out of court, but it has not been. Instead, the court has rubber stamped the decision to extradite Julian Assange. Now, all hope is not lost. There will be further appeals, but time is running out. And the reality is that it's much more likely today that Julian will be sent to the United States injustice system, where he faces a maximum of 175 years in a supermax prison, never to be seen again, his face never to be kissed again by his children and his newly wed wife. It is, for me, exceedingly painful to watch this slow crucifixion of a man I am honored to count as a friend. I have been with him from the first day. I'll be with him until the last day and beyond. And all I can say further at this stage is that Julian Assange will be remembered proudly in history long after his persecutors are forgotten. The people who murdered Comandante Che Guevara are all long forgotten, and indeed many of them came to a sticky end after they had killed him. But the memory of Che Guevara burns brightly in the history of the last 50 years and into the future, guiding people over the next century or more of human development. And I count Julian Assange in that company, in the company of heroes. I don't have a lot of heroes. I find mostly they have feet of clay in the end. I see Bernie Sanders is threatening to run again. If ever a hero had feet of clay, I'm afraid it is him. So I don't have many heroes, but Julian Assange is definitely one of those. I ask you to hold Julian and his family in your prayers if you pray as I do, and hope and campaign and raise your voice everywhere for his release. It is laughable when you think about it that the British government and Western governments, including the United States government, are forever denouncing other people's restrictions on media freedom, stamping people with the logo that they are state-affiliated media. This on the day, by the way, that the British government made a further multi-million pound grant to the BBC to continue their campaign of disinformation about Ukraine and other international issues. Every BBC journalist is a state-affiliated journalist. They just don't like to admit it. But the discerning among you already know that. But all this piffle about freedom of expression, about the freedom of the media, pales in ugliness when one considers that the most famous political prisoner in the entire world is here in London, not in Moscow, not in Ukraine, not in Belarus, not in China. The most famous political prisoner in the world is here in London, and moreover, is being kept in disgusting conditions in Belmarsh prison, home to the world's worst mass murderers and terrorists. Julian Assange, a gentle man who has been broken on the wheel of British and American injustice. That brings me to another solemn and melancholy matter, namely the fate of Gonzalo Lira. I don't know Gonzalo Lira, but I have interviewed him twice on the mother of all talk shows. I found what he had to say both courageous and illuminating. He was reporting from the streets of Kharkov. Well, nobody else is. All these journalists that flew, some of them at public subscription, are in the watering holes in Kiev. None of them are on the streets of Kharkov. This is the most underreported, under-photographed, under-filmed war in history, in an era where everyone is a photojournalist. Everyone has a camera on their phone. But Gonzalo did walk the streets of Kharkov and tell us what he saw there. Now, his analysis may be right, may be wrong, may be halfway. right and halfway wrong. That isn't the point. He was a citizen journalist who was doing his best to provide some balance in this obscenely unbalanced war coverage, this tsunami of war propaganda, this psychological war that is being mounted against us in Western to terrorize us into ponying up ever larger sums of money that pour into God knows whom, God knows where in the exchequer of the Ukraine. At this stage, it's kind of money laundering, if you ask me. Biden announced another $800 million today for equipment that is very likely to be either destroyed by Russian bombardment or taken by the Russians or sold by the Ukrainians to the Russians, as lots of film makes clear is already happening. Or, of course, the weapons could be on the dark web and in the hands of ISIS and Al Qaeda or far right and Nazi groups already all over Europe. This is a Frankenstein monster that we have created. Gonzalo Lira tried to bring us some balance. And last Friday, we arranged for him to appear on the mother of all talk shows last Sunday night. He didn't turn up. He hasn't been in touch with anyone since us on that Friday. He did say at one point that if he's not in touch within 12 hours, if you don't hear from him on social media, then you can add his name to the list of martyrs, of people who have been butchered by the coup regime in Kiev and their fascist overlords. For that is what they are. Zelensky isn't in power in Kiev. He is the lipstick on the monstrous pig of far-right nationalism and actual Nazism in Ukraine. He's not free to negotiate an end to this bloody killing. He's not free because the Azov regiment and the right sector and Svoboda and all the other far-right formations would murder him if he did. He's not free to negotiate an end to this conflict because the United States plainly doesn't want an end to this conflict. And they are paying the piper and are now calling the tune. Gonzalo is missing. He's feared dead. If he is dead, I pray that it was mercifully quick, because the fascists, the Nazis that are glorying in his disappearance are talking about some unspeakable things that may have happened to him. Gonzalo Lira, I hope and pray that you will make a reappearance, that all of this is merely temporary hell for your family and for the many thousands of people around the world who had come to value your work from the streets of Kharkov. But if it is not, we promise to hold your example high as a citizen journalist, apparently murdered in pursuit of the truth. Now, I'll be tomorrow in Manchester between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. I'll be there at the festival that is being organized in support of Imran Khan, the legitimate Prime Minister of Pakistan, a country I know and love. I've known it since the 1970s. I hold its two highest awards, the Hilal-e-Quaid-e-Azam and the Hilal-e-Pakistan, for my work in the restoration of democracy in Pakistan and for my work in highlighting the abuses of the people in occupied Kashmir. I know personally thousands of Pakistanis in the country and abroad, particularly here in Britain. I was proud to represent many tens of thousands of Pakistanis in my nearly 30 years in the British Parliament, particularly in the Bradford West constituency, where I won an historic by-election victory exactly 10 years ago. So I care about Pakistan. As I've said before, I'm not an Imran Khan man. I never supported him before, but I'm supporting him now because he's been overthrown in a military coup. It's true that the courts were used as the lipstick on the face of that military coup, but it was a military coup, and moreover, a military coup ordered by the United States of America to overthrow the government of Pakistan, which they considered to be far too close to both China and Russia. Now, the new Prime Minister of Pakistan, I know you'll think I'm making this up, is currently on bail on money laundering charges, corruption charges, involving eye-watering sums of corrupt money. In the charge, he's accused along with his son. Now, today, that man, still on bail, is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the crime minister of Pakistan, and his son is the Chief Minister of the Punjab, the most populous and most important province in the entire country. How's that for nepotism? How's that for crime doesn't pay? Well, it does pay in Pakistan if you've got the judiciary and the army and above all the United States of America on your side. There are many things you could criticize Imran Khan for, and many people have. Some people once close to me. But they know, and I know, that those criticisms, even if well-founded, are not the reasons why Imran Khan has been overthrown. He's been overthrown because of his relations with China and with Russia. He's been overthrown for the same reasons that Prime Minister Modi in India might well be overthrown. The leadership in the Solomon Islands might be overthrown. These are regime changes so that the United States empire, sometimes calling itself NATO, can use these countries and their people as launch pads for war and aggression, economic and military, against the countries that are coming together, coalescing in the Eurasian future, which challenges fatally American hegemony in the world. That's the only reason why Imran Khan has been overthrown. I was told today it was because of inflation in Pakistan that he was overthrown. Germany is currently experiencing its highest level of inflation since 1949, 4 years after the end of the Second World War. Britain is suffering inflation, its worst inflation, for 30 years. So don't tell me that Imran Khan has been overthrown because he's failed to get on top of inflation. There are 34 members of the new Pakistani federal cabinet. 24 of them are on bail. Look, I know you think I'm making this up, but you can check. 24 out of 34 members of the federal cabinet of Pakistan are on bail, accused of hundreds, thousands actually, of corruption cases. Pakistan is an important country, 220 million people. It's got nuclear weapons. It's in a geostrategic place of the greatest importance, with India, with China, with Afghanistan. Pakistan is vital. Its stability is vital to the stability of the region and of the world. And it's now in absolute turmoil because of a United States coup, which has overthrown a prime minister who, whatever else you can say about him, is actually as honest as the day is long. Perhaps the only uncorrupted prime minister that Pakistan has ever had. And yet he's been overthrown and replaced by a rogues gallery, by the Police Gazette front page of wanted criminals. It shows how badly off the United States empire is in places like Pakistan, that it couldn't find anybody with integrity, with a reputation to put in place of Imran Khan. It had to sweep the floors of the bar rooms of London and elsewhere and put back together again the old gang, a gang of wanted criminals. Well, I'll be there between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. in the Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester, and I'm very glad to do so. As I say, not because I want people to vote for Imran Khan. I wouldn't get involved in that level of involvement in Pakistani internal politics. But I am supporting the demand for general elections now. Pakistan needs an election. It is the only way out of this crisis. It's the only way out of this absolute instability. Last Friday, in Karachi, not his heartland, millions and millions and millions of people came out in support of Imran Khan in Karachi. Not at all his heartland. It may have been the biggest demonstration in the entire history of the world. I'm not joking. Look at the pictures of it. And tomorrow, another rally in Imran Khan's heartland of the Punjab, in the great city of Lahore. May God preserve it, one of my favorite places in all the world. In Lahore, tomorrow night, there will be a jalsa, a fiesta, a demonstration, a protest, a manifestation so massive that they've taken down the internet tomorrow in all of Pakistan. Can you believe it? In the interest of freedom and democracy, there will be no internet tomorrow in Pakistan. I don't know if they think this is 1952 or even 2002. I don't know if they imagine that they can somehow suppress the news. Sure, you can hold a gun to the heads of journalists or stuff their mouths with gold, both of which, no doubt, will be tried, but the truth will out. And everyone will see tomorrow from Lahore, including those of us in Manchester, because behind me on the stage will be an even bigger attraction. There'll be a big screen and people will be able to watch live Imran Khan addressing the Jalsa in Lahore. So, if you're anywhere near Manchester, the place to be tomorrow night between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. is Piccadilly Gardens, right in the center of the city. If you see me, say hello. Now on to the Ukraine-Russia war. The situation has changed. The military situation has changed. Russia has moved on to what it calls phase 2 of what it calls its special military operation, what I call its invasion of Ukraine. Phase 2 quite clearly seeks to basically encircle in a cauldron the maximum number of soldiers of the Ukrainian armed forces and to encourage them to surrender. From what I've seen, the prisoners of war taken by the Russians are being treated humanely, according to the Geneva Protocols. That doesn't apply, of course, to foreign mercenaries. And Russia is saying that there are thousands of foreign mercenaries in Ukraine. Some have been captured and have sadly recounted how they fell for all the lies, how they fell for the war propaganda, and the call by British government minister Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary no less, who said that the government would help those who wanted to go to the Ukraine as mercenaries to fight. Well, more fool them. They've now been captured. It would have been within the laws of war for them to be executed on the battlefield. I'm glad to say that has not happened. And I appeal to the Russian authorities, by all means, of course, to put these individuals on trial and to imprison them if found guilty, but to treat them humanely, not to execute them. And I have no flag to fly for any mercenary, the dogs of war. But I think in terms of international opinion, it's very important that even these mercenaries are treated with mercy by those Russian soldiers who are capturing them. Now we're coming to the anniversary of the storming of Berlin, which was conducted by the then Soviet Union's Red Army. And the flag of the USSR was held aloft above the Reichstag and not far from the bunker in which the beast of Berlin, Adolf Hitler, finally perished. The world owes an eternal debt of gratitude to the armed forces of the USSR and to the public of the USSR, who lost 26 million of their number in defeating fascism in May of 1945. If not for them, as I keep saying, I'd be talking to you in German, except I wouldn't be allowed to talk to you at all. I'd be dead. I'd never have been born. And people like you would never have been able to listen to anything remotely resembling this. We might still be under the jackboot of fascism in all parts of the world. In Asia, Japanese fascism. In North Africa, and in Italy, and in Sicily, and in Greece, and elsewhere, under the heel of Italian fascism. And of course, the rest of us under German occupation. I'll never learn to hate the Russians, and I'll never learn to love the Germans, or the Japanese for that matter, I must tell you. Because I was born just 9 years after the Second World War, it cast a shadow over the world in which I grew up. Indeed, its shadow is cast still. I will never love the Germans and hate the Russians. That much I can tell you for nothing. And on the 8th of May, Sunday the 8th of May, at noon, I'll be addressing, along with other fine speakers, a rally to remember Victory Day over fascism in 1945, to celebrate the historic wartime alliance of the United States of America, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union and its successor state, Russia. The meeting will take place at noon on Sunday, the 8th of May, in the Bolivar Hall in London. It is in Fitzrovia. You'll easily find it on your A to Z, but you'll have to buy tickets because we're expecting a packed turnout. I think it's the right time to show our appreciation for the heroes and the martyrs of that wartime alliance who rescued the world from Hitler fascism and from Nazism. Russia is having to do it all again in eastern Ukraine. And I don't believe that the denazification which is well advanced now, will ever be possible if the nests which were infested by these Nazis are vacated by the armed forces of the People's Republics in Donetsk and Lugansk and now Mariupol. These will never return to Western Ukrainian sovereignty. It's a great pity. I didn't want this. I didn't expect this. I really prayed that this would not happen. But the cost of liberating Mariupol from fascism was such that it would be absolutely unpalatable to Russian public opinion were those costs to have been incurred only for Mariupol to be handed back to the coup regime in Kiev, who would immediately restock it with the surviving Nazis, surviving fascists in the western part of Ukraine. I hope that Ukraine continues to exist as a country, as a state. But the only way that that can happen is for a negotiated settlement to this war, with Ukraine accepting that it will be a neutral country, that it will not join NATO or any other military bloc. It will not allow foreign military bases on its soil. It will not allow foreign military weapons and trainers and all the paraphernalia of NATO insidious infiltration of Ukraine, which we now know was well advanced long before this invasion of Ukraine took place. I hope that a declaration of neutrality and the denazification to which I referred, and a declaration by the western part of Ukraine that it will be like Austria, like Sweden, like Switzerland, be a neutral country, will be sufficient for a political settlement to be reached. But the Crimea is never going back to Kiev. There were Russian naval forces based in the Crimea before the United States of America existed as a state. The idea that that is going to be handed over by Russia is simply absurd. The national rights of the people of Crimea and of the Donbass will have to be respected. But as for the rest, I hope that a sane government in Kiev can continue to govern those territories. But the longer this war goes on, the more the price that is paid, the harder it will be to reach a settlement which does not involve facts on the ground, which change Ukraine forever. It didn't have to be this way. The Russians were calling, I was calling, on the eve of this invasion for the Minsk agreements to be implemented and a declaration of neutrality to be made. No answer came to those demands. And the war, awful though it is, became inevitable from that moment. We are being treated to a tsunami of lies about the war. And when someone emerges like Gonzalo to try to redress the imbalance, they're promptly murdered, as a so-called pro-Russian blogger was today in the city of Kherson. I watched the bulldozer destroy the statue of Marshal Zhukov, who liberated the Ukraine, who led the liberation of Berlin, being bulldozed. I don't know who they intended to put up in his place. Heinrich Himmler, maybe. But Zhukov will soon be back on his plinth, because the victory in May of 1945 will never, ever be allowed to be forgotten. I see that in Odessa today, a street was named after the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. I predict, call me a soothsayer, I predict that that street will not be named Boris Johnson Street for long. I predict that the people that did it with their tongue in their cheek. Because Boris Johnson not only does not deserve a street in Odessa called after him, he doesn't deserve to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and guess what? May not be for very much longer. Much will depend on the local election results in the United Kingdom on the 7th of May. But if they go badly for the Conservative Party, I expect the rug to be pulled from underneath Boris Johnson very quickly indeed. And then there'll be no more Boris Johnson in England, and probably not in Odessa either. Johnson is desperate to escape from his economic and political woes. Yes, the proximate reason for the demands for his resignation are absurd. A birthday cake on his birthday during the lockdown, all of that is flim-flam. But that's just the proximate reason. Boris Johnson is a deeply unserious, untrustworthy individual. And moreover, he's a big fail. He failed at everything. He failed as a father. He failed as a husband many times. He failed as a member of parliament. He failed as the mayor of London. He failed as the foreign secretary. Ask Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe just how badly he failed as the foreign secretary. And he has serially failed as the Prime Minister of Britain. And no waving of Ukrainian flags, no parading as a great war leader is going to save him, because, you know, every act has its day, and every act tends to go on too long. And eventually it has to be hooked off the stage. That's what they used to do in the music halls. A good act that went on too long is Boris Johnson's act. And it won't last for very much longer, in my opinion. He's taken to saying, you can't remove me because you can't change prime ministers during a war. Well, that's odd for a biographer of Winston Churchill, who became prime minister in a year into the Second World War, who became prime minister precisely because his predecessor, the wretched Neville Chamberlain, had been such a miserable failure. The idea that a country doesn't change leaders in a war is belied not just by Britain in the First World War and in the Second World War. Winston Churchill was kicked out of office when the smoke was still rising in Berlin, but also by France, where the presidential election runoff on Sunday is now too close to call. As I predicted last Sunday on the mother of all talk shows, Mélenchon's 20% left vote is breaking 50-50 between Le Pen and Macron. But the Macron part is by far the softer. there will be millions of people will abstain on Sunday. I myself could vote for neither of these two individuals. If I was French, I'd be myself among them. But will there be enough? The old in France hate Macron because he raised their retirement age. The working class in France hate Macron because of his neoliberal economics, his slave-like obeisance to the European Union and German hegemony within it. 49% of the people of France polled today want France to leave the military command of NATO, as General de Gaulle did back in the 1960s. 52% of the people of France polled today don't want war with Russia and don't want France to be involved in any way in war against Russia. So France might change its leadership on Sunday in the middle of a war in which the French are actually even more deeply involved than we in the United Kingdom are. But make no mistake, this is Biden's war. It's Biden's war for many reasons. It's a wag the dog war to divert attention from his catastrophic failures as a leader and as a sentient human being. Everybody in Washington knows that poor old Joe isn't fit to button up his own pajamas, never mind to have his finger on the nuclear button. Everybody knows that this war is a diversion. This war is a proxy war with Russia using the bodies and the territory of Ukraine as a proxy. Everybody knows this is about imposing American hegemony on the western part of Europe to make sure that Germany never dreams of economic and energy cooperation with Russia. This war is about exerting dominance by the United States on its allies, because it certainly can't exert its dominance on the Russians or the Chinese, who've got enough firepower to destroy the entire country of the United States of America. And for that matter, one bomb could destroy all of the United Kingdom. The new hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missile, nicknamed Satan II, which was successfully test fired by the Russians today, is uninterceptable, travels at 10 times the speed of sound, would land in England 6 minutes after it was fired, presumably from the steppes of Russia or from under the sea. 6 minutes later, the whole of Britain would be smoldering ash. One rocket. That puts into perspective this vainglorious stupidity of the likes of Boris Johnson, waving their willies, rattling their little swords. Really, grow up and negotiate an end to this conflict in Ukraine. Thank you very much for listening. Let me take some contributions. I'm sure they'll come up on the screen. This is AKA UNB, Eric Blair. That's George Orwell's real name, of course. AKA UNB. God bless you, George. Your spirit is an inspiration. My prayers for Julian Assange and all those who have gone before. What a crazy and cruel world, thinking of the hypocrisy compared to the Pinochet case. Indeed so. Pinochet, the Chilean fascist dictator, was under house arrest living elegantly in Britain, whilst he dodged a Spanish extradition request. And Mrs. Thatcher even went to visit him. And he went back home safely into his dotage. Julian, on the other hand, was crucified right after Easter. Let me see if there's any more good ones. Frank Walker says, when it comes to Julian Assange, the deal to extradite him to America was made years ago, the British government following America's orders. It's true, Frank, that the one-sided extradition treaty, which I was assured personally by its author, the then David Blunkett, now Lord Blunkett, who was the then Home Secretary, he personally assured me that a political case like Julian Assange's could never be successful under the extradition treaty that he concluded in secret with the United States of America during the summer holidays, when Parliament could not only not see it, but could not question it, could not debate it. And it is the most one-sided extradition treaty anyone could ever imagine. It makes it impossible for the killer of poor Harry Dunn, a CIA operative, to be extradited to the United Kingdom, but highly probable that Julian Assange will be extradited the other way. It is a national shame on us, the British. You're right, Frank, about that. Let's see if there's any others. Paul Hopkins says the exoskeleton of Western politics in all its forms was perhaps always deeply compromised, but that's not to say I approve of it getting any worse. I think you raise a profound point there, Paul, because I never thought I'd say this. I genuinely never thought I'd say this. But it's quite difficult to argue that Britain is any longer a democracy at all. We have a one-party parliament, two cheeks of the same arse, facing each other in pretend outrage, when in fact, behind the scenes, you couldn't slip sixpence between those two cheeks. They're that tightly bound together. We have a court system, which it would appear in the Assange case and many others, is no longer fit for purpose. All of our institutions have gone down, one after the other. The BBC, down. The Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, down. The courts, down. Parliament, down. The royal family, down. One after another, like dominoes. The things that made Britain famous throughout the world as a democracy are all disappearing. And perhaps the most important of those is freedom of speech, because if you don't have freedom of speech, how can you have a democracy? As I've been saying, if you don't know the other side of the war story in Ukraine, how can you be sure that your side of the story is correct? You can only do that if you know what's happening through the viewpoint of both sides. But that has been made impossible, literally criminalized. So how do you know you're on the right track? Because you trust your government so much? Really? You trusted them over the Iraq war? What happened there? You trusted them over 9/11? What happened there? You trusted them over Brexit, over Corbyn? What happened there? They've lied to you so many times. Are you seriously saying that you treat what they say now about the Ukraine war as gospel, when they've made it a crime for you to see and hear the other side of the story? Britain is in deep, deep trouble. Let's see if there are any more. We've got about 10 minutes. I can't read the name on that. So I'll just read out. What is it? Macarios. Journalists on Twitter are cheering Lira's disappearance and possible death. Absolutely disgusting people. Well, they're not called reptiles for nothing. There may be, I could count them on one hand very easily, decent journalists left in this land, but the rest could crawl under a snake wearing a top hat very, very easily. Let's see. Shout out the names, will you, please? Balko Duma. Oh, donation. Thank you. 20 euros. Thank you very much for that. Hat tip to Gonzalo in the color of his cap. Poor Gonzalo. The thought of what might have been his final hours is too much to bear. As I say, I never met him. I don't agree with him. I've seen some of his earlier work. Pretty far out. But he was a citizen journalist trying to do his best. He's an American and Chilean citizen. What are these governments doing to free him? What are these governments doing to hold the regime in Kiev to account? Is there no habeas corpus? Is there nothing they can do diplomatically to get a proper explanation as to what has happened to their citizen? Shout out the name, please. Huckle One. Zelensky is now interfering in the French election. Wow. He has spoken to the French channel, BMF TV, and said Marine Le Pen is in the wrong, and added he has a good relationship with Macron. I'm not sure how many votes that's actually worth down on the streets of France, but thanks for telling me. I didn't know that. Daniel Powell, a statue of Johnson should be erected in the shape of a giant tombstone in remembrance to the 200,000 COVID dead, up there with the highest per capita on the earth. Well, that and the grand larceny of the public purse that was extracted by the Boris Johnson government to fill the pockets of crony capitalists and even personal cronies, even family cronies of some of Mr. Johnson's ministers. As I've said many times, I don't want Boris Johnson to resign. I want Boris Johnson to be on trial, along with Matt Hancock and many others in the government, guilty of great crimes against our people. Coffee says no Pakistani prime minister has lasted a full term. It's nothing special and nothing to do with America. It's their politics. It was done before him and will be done again. Well, Coffee, why don't you call me on the mother of all talk shows on Sunday and you and I can have that out. But it's undoubtedly true that the malignant shadow of the top brass of the Pakistani military has cast its baleful and deadly and fatal shadow for far too long in Pakistani politics. Pakistan needs a revolution. It needs a complete revolution. And Imran Khan might just be the man to carry that out. Olga, I can't read the second part of the name. It's very small writing and it's quite far away from me. Tarasova? Chelpanova. Thanks, Olga. I'm Russian and I'm grateful to Mr. Galloway for his appreciation of the Soviet-Russian sacrifice, especially these days. Well, Olga, a friend is only a real friend in tough times. It would have been easy for us. We do this every year in the Workers' Party of Britain, of which I'm proud to be the leader. We do it every year. We lay wreaths, we hold gatherings. It would have been easy for us to dodge it this year and not suffer the brickbats the slings and arrows. But what kind of friend would we be if we had? We're loyal to the memory of the great patriotic war and the great victory over fascism in which it ended. There's a wonderful graphic. Sunday, the 8th of May, 12 noon start in the Bolivar Hall, 54 Grafton Way in London, W1T5DL. Lovely graphic, that. So it's a meeting of the Workers' Party, but we hope there'll be Russian, Chinese, and other British speakers at the rally. I'll, of course, be speaking at it also. So, any more? We've still got 4 minutes or so. Akram Nasser Bakht says, George, Germany announced today that they are going out to phase out using Russian energy by the end of 2022. Do you think they can achieve this? Only over the dead body of the German economy. And I don't believe that either the workers of Germany or the employers, the manufacturers, the mighty manufacturing sector in Germany will accept that. I think that this weak and weird government in Germany, where the Social Democrats, the biggest party, are led by the nose by the tranks of greenery. You know, there's a lot of parties I don't like, most parties I don't like. But I cannot stand Greens. I can't stand their sanctimony, and I can't stand their hypocrisy. And everywhere that they get the sniff of power, they use it for the most disgusting things. Either the extremes of identity politics, or in the case of Germany, war, and more war. As if war wasn't the biggest disaster for an environment. A lot bigger than plastic straws, I can assure you of that. Still got 2 minutes or so. Captain Freedom says, my goodness, George, thank Christ for you and your truth on the Ukraine conflict. But what are we to do about Manchester United? Well, one of my sons is really making waves now in football in the Manchester area. He's almost 15. He's 6 foot. He plays up front. He's scoring goals with his head, with both feet. And like Alex Ferguson before him, he plays with his elbows, if you get my meaning. He's the first son that I'm prepared to give for the cause. My youngest son, Torren, who's now about to turn 8 years old, you'll have to wait 8 years for him, but I promise you, he's worth the wait. Manchester United need a thoroughgoing clear out. There's hardly anyone that took the field against Liverpool that I would have in my team. Hannibal, a young boy with virtually no appearances, did more in 5 to 10 minutes than the senior professionals did in the whole of the 90. At least he showed that the game meant something to him. Shall we take a last question? Preferably not about football. I'm starting a football podcast called Georgia's Best Football Podcast, but just haven't been able to do it yet. Very proud of Mr. George Galloway, says Reza, a great broadcaster, great former politician. Thanks, Reza. Well, I'm a former politician at the moment, but you never know what lies ahead. What lies ahead for me is that I repair now to the Patreon for an after hours discussion. So if you want to continue this discussion, follow me to patreon.com/George Galloway. Meanwhile, if you don't, I'll see you on Sunday for the mother of all talk shows at 7 p.m. London time. Unless you're in the Manchester area, in which case, God willing, I'll see you tomorrow night. That's the end of the Galloway Show. Thanks very much for watching.